Hello and welcome to the Pole Position Podcast, Episode 4. They're flying by, Jamie. Episode 4 of the Pole Position Podcast. Welcome, of course. I've already said his name already, but Jamie Davies is here for the episode. The Bahrain Grand Prix preview. We've already had the Australian Grand Prix. Wasn't too bad. Did you say it was 6 or 7 out of 10 last week?
I think it was 6, yeah.
So, Bahrain Grand Prix. It made history in 2004 for being the first F1 Grand Prix to be held in the Middle East. This time, a little bit easier for you, Jamie, because it's a 4:10 in the afternoon start time, so you don't have to get up extremely early. But is this a track that excites you? Is this a track that you enjoy, watching? I mean, it's a night race now, which is, I think, a little bit better. We've got a couple of night races on the calendar. Is this a race you look forward to on the calendar, or is it just another race that rolls by on the weekends?
I think what I always love the most about Bahrain, it doesn't seem to happen at any other track, is just the fact that you see sparks everywhere. I remember that straight when Hamilton overtook at least 2 cars last year, and then he overtook them on a straight line. Free wheelers pretty much just going down to the first corner, and he overtook them, and I thought, that's great overtaking. But then yet again, having a Mercedes certainly helps. But I don't know, it's a good question. I quite like it. I think it's more noticed now because it's a night race. Mm-hmm. I remember it used to be the opening Grand Prix to an F1 season. And then obviously from 2014 onwards, it's been a night race in which, I welcome it. It means, as you say, a later start. I presume the F1 teams quite like it because they probably don't have to get up so early, but they don't have to wait till like late on in the afternoon for practice, etc. But I mean, it's been on the calendar for 15 years now. I mean, it's gone through so much. Actually, when you think of the last few years, because obviously there was protests and all that in Bahrain a few years back, there was concerns that they couldn't carry on doing the race there, but they've got through it, and it's good for F1 because Middle East need to prove themselves in my eyes. Because when people say Middle East, they think it's not the most safest of places the world offers. But at the end of the day, we've got a Qatar World Cup coming up in football. We've got a Qatar World Athletics coming up as well later this year. So it is becoming a sporting region, you could say, the Middle East.
Yeah, and of course with the Bahrain Grand Prix and the final race of the year on the F1 calendar, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, there's sort of a lot more going on in that area now. But interesting, looking at the previous winners of this race, when I was thinking, I'm going to have to edit, from the Australian Grand Prix, it's actually the same running order that's won it to the Australian Grand Prix. So 4 years of racing, it's been the same winners for both races.
Oh, is it?
So if you look at 2015, Lewis Hamilton won. Nico Rosberg won in 2016. Sebastian Vettel won in 2017, and he won in 2018, which looked to be a good start for Ferrari last year. Hasn't started that well for Ferrari this year, but Sebastian Vettel has the most wins with 4, and Ferrari have the most wins with 6. So obviously talking last week about the bad performance, should we say, of Ferrari, is this a race where they obviously need to prove themselves? I think Australia is completely different track-wise to Bahrain, but do you think their pace should be shown in this, or do you hope the pace should be shown?
I mean, you could say, do they need to perform in this race? And I think, yes, they do, to convince their fans, because if I don't know, if Bottas won again this weekend and Ferrari were nowhere to be seen again, then it's concerns, really, because it's 2 different tracks, as you say, and this time last year they would have won both circuits with Vettel. Not as comfortable, but they still won them. Vettel had that great start to the season in which F1 thought, hang on a minute, he might actually contend with Lewis Hamilton, and then that crash in Germany happened, and then
it all fell apart.
Just like World War II for the Germans. But I think as well, they just seem to fall apart against the Brits. But I think, look, they might be a completely different team this weekend. They've had the 2-week gap between Australia and Bahrain. We'll see. I'm hoping they're gonna compete a lot better. Even if they just get a podium, it's already an improvement from Australia. We'll see. But Mercedes have struggled there in the last few years, and I can't remember. I think Hamilton won there 2 years ago. No, I think
Rosberg won in 2016. Hamilton won in 2015.
And they didn't win in 2017 because that was Vettel again, wasn't it?
Vettel won 17 and 18.
So it's it's a track that Mercedes would like to get back under their belt as well.
The one of the races I can remember was Sebastian Vettel not even starting. He pulled off in the formation lap in Bahrain.
Yeah.
He didn't even make the even make the start.
No.
So that wasn't a great time for him. But I just want to go back to, before we move on to now, the duel between Hamilton and Rosberg in 2014.
That was a cracking race.
Did that sort of cement this track? Because I think before then it was like, okay, it's Bahrain, it's a generic race, a bit like Baku in the first year before we realised actually this is good racing. But do you think between the Rosberg and Hamilton battle, people went, okay, this is a good track, because every single lap they were trying to overtake each other, so the track was actually aiding the two of them, fighting it out.
And that's when the rivalry started, didn't it? But that was when they were still friends. Well, I don't know if they are now, but. That's when they would have a laugh about it when the race finished, and Rosberg would go up to him, wouldn't he, and punch him, saying, I would have won that. You took it from me. But, I think it showed as well that Mercedes were the team to beat from there on, because that's when they were just miles ahead of everyone else. And then the good old Pastor Maldonado, Gutierrez, or whoever it was, crashed, and then one of the cars flip over. That race was crazy. And then Perez got third. Great times for Perez fans. But...
Good old Perez.
But I think I remember 2006 as well, when Alonso overtook Michael Schumacher, and that was to win the first race of the season. And that was, a lot of people thought, like, Alonso knows how to beat Schumacher. And that was a great race as well. There was a lot of overtaking at the front from that one. So I think it's a proper circuit. It is, isn't it? It's out in the middle of nowhere. And then you've got big moments where you can take over on the track. So I think it's a cracking circuit, and I think you're right about the 2014 race. It will take a lot for any race in the future to beat that. I'd love to see a Bottas Hamilton do it this weekend. That'd be incredible. You never know, it could.
I was going to say, the way Bottas was fighting in Australia, I think Hamilton might have a lot to deal with. I mean, there has been talk since that race, almost 2 weeks now. All the talk has been about how Valtteri Bottas has sort of been rejuvenated, and it's crazy because he hardly got any mention last year. It was Lewis Hamilton and it was Sebastian Vettel. Bottas was just the guy that helped Mercedes and Hamilton when they needed it. But these last 2 weeks, it's sort of like Hamilton's not. I don't want to say not being forgotten, but every article I see, whether it be on BBC Sport, Sky Sports, and all that. It all seems to be about Bottas. I mean,
I think he'll like.
Is that is that a sort of? It's not a switch, because we know Hamilton is the best driver in the team. But I'm just saying that that's a great bit of promotion and confidence for Valtteri Bottas to know that everybody's gone, wow, that was really good performance on a couple of weeks ago.
But I think as well, Valtteri Bottas might feel a bit more pressure again, because all eyes could be on him on the weekend to win 2 in a row. Well, I think Lewis Hamilton likes it. Like, he'll just get on with his job and just do the silent kill and win the race, because it's all about the 21 races at the end of the day. That's what makes F1 such a test. Winning a race is still a big achievement for anyone, but I think to be consistent throughout the year, you look back at like Schumacher, Hamilton, Senna, and you think, they dominate the sport at Vettel at a point, and, they dominate the sport. But it's such a tough challenge, because you've got to perform by finishing first in every race, because no one thinks anything less of you. They expect you to do the best of the best. So I think for Hamilton, he likes it. He's probably not getting that pressure on him. He's just thinking, look, I've just got to focus on my race. And I think he's happy for Bottas, though, because there was quite a nice picture of Bottas and Hamilton at the end of the Australia race. And I think Hamilton's got a lot of respect for him, because he's taken it on the chin in the past, where he is number 2 to Hamilton. But there has been times when Lewis would want to see him smile as well as he does, because you don't want to be part of a project where you're not happy. No. It's like just anyone that goes to work. You don't want a job where you're not always happy. You want to always be delighted with what you're doing. So I think that's why it's quite nice to see. It could all change if they have their moments on the track, but we've never ever seen a Bottas Hamilton heated moment, have we, really? Please, gotta happen. Toto Wolff will be disagreeing with us right now, because he will get really stressful and might have a second heart attack. Their first one was secret; he didn't tell anyone. Oh, right. That was after Spain 2016.
Well, that was a real. That was a real moment.
That cemented their relationship in terms of they were not friends.
But so, before we move on to news part of the podcast. Do you think a Ferrari will make it on the podium in Bahrain this weekend?
I'm just going to say I hope so.
Is that? You just
but
hope so?
Verstappen's the man, isn't he?
That's another one we're obviously going to talk about.
He's got 6 races under his belt being on the podium in a row. So I think Verstappen is I'm not going to say dragging Red Bull on, but he is putting them in their place where, Pierre Gasly's still learning, I think. He needs to learn what it's going to be like being a number 2 driver for a bit, accepting that he's not their number 1 priority. But they know in time that as long as he does his bit for the team, then Red Bull can always think, well, why should we let him go? Because he is a team player. And that's what F1 is at the end of the day. So I think Verstappen's the man, though, to watch out for, because I think he's pushing that car a lot better than it should be.
Is that Honda power unit going to be tested and shown its real pace this weekend then? Because Australia is more... It's more an aerodynamic track, isn't it? Let's be honest. The full power isn't used on that circuit to compare to Bahrain, where there's 2 really long straights. Well, 3 really. There's about 3 long straights. So, would you say that this Honda power unit is going to be tested this weekend? Are we going to really see if Verstappen can push his way onto the podium?
Well, I hope so. I mean, another thing to mention, Pierre Gasly knows what it did last year when he came 4th for Toro Rosso, and that was a Honda power unit.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that could help this time round. So, imagine what it could do for Red Bull this year. So I think a podium's a definite for Red Bull. But I think as well they could do getting an early race win somewhere just to kind of remind people, it's not just Mercedes and Ferrari. We're in this title hunt as well. For how long, we don't know.
Yeah, well, let's hope that Pierre Gasly does do well, because you put him in the Let's Talk Sport videos of top 5 in the championship as 5th. So we're hoping for you that Pierre Gasly does well. I'm going to remind you all season, Jamie. It was an absolute shock to me when you said that.
We'll have to do a reaction video at the end of the season.
But I'm going to go on to Pierre Gasly, actually, because Christian Horner said in the news this week that he predicts a better time for Pierre Gasly throughout the season after a difficult start in Australia. I mean, when you look at Max Verstappen, his first outing for Red Bull, I remember being here in the Calne FM studios when it happened. He won his first race. The first time in a Red Bull, he won the race. Pierre Gasly, not so much. He finished 11th. It's a completely different contrast to their starts, but I think people got to look at it. It is his first race in a Red Bull. He's just moved to the team. It doesn't. Not everybody starts as amazingly as Max Verstappen does. No. It does take time, and I think obviously getting stuck behind Daniel Kvyat for most of the race and not being able to get past, didn't help. But Christian Horner says he drove a good race. His recovery was strong. He just needs a straightforward weekend. He needs a good practice, a good qualifying, and a good race, because I think he struggled in qualifying as well. He didn't make out the top first queue, wasn't it?
I think we need to remember that apparently he was stuck in traffic in Q1, and I think that's how he didn't get out of it. I don't know if that's really an excuse. I didn't really see it, but if that is the case, then obviously he's not showing the true power of the Red Bull at the moment compared to what Verstappen was able to do on the Saturday. But I think with Pierre Gasly, it's he's got a season, hasn't he, to prove himself? I think, because if he's the one that's dragging the team down, then he could be out at the end of the season. We're jumping to conclusions, aren't we? By saying that, but Daniel Kvyat is back and he wants to get back at Red Bull.
Can you imagine if he got back in there?
Can you imagine him and Verstappen after the fact that Verstappen swapped for him for nearly 3 years ago?
He'd be like, Arnie, I'm back.
I mean, he probably would say in that tone, because his tone of voice is very weird. It's very Russian. But you just never know, dear. But I think Kvyat must know now this is his last chance at Toro Rosso, because at the end of the day he might be coming back just to make up the numbers, because Toro Rosso didn't know where to look as well as getting Albon in. But we'll see.
Well, speaking of Kvyat, that's another part of the news stories this week. He's liking the fresh start coming back to Toro Rosso. At the end of 2017, it looked like his career in F1 was over. I mean, he got dropped for Max Verstappen in 2016 from Red Bull, and he was sort of forced out by Toro Rosso after the end of that season. But now, first race of the year coming back, he looked good. They did well in qualifying, the Toro Rosso car, and being able to hold off the supposed to be faster car with Pierre Gasly behind the wheel. He did a really good job. He goes on to say it feels like a fresh start. It's a good opportunity to be a better driver. He's less sort of pressure now. Is this the time for Daniil Kvyat to sort of shine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said before, it's his last chance in my eyes. But, sometimes getting away from it probably just helped him. obviously, at the time, we didn't expect to ever hear his name again. He was a Ferrari third driver for 2018, if I can remember. Which we always joke at, don't we? Whoever becomes a third driver at Ferrari normally doesn't promote after that. Pedro De La Rosa was at Ferrari for 1 year, which was just, you knew he wasn't.
Was Giovinazzi?
He was. No, was he?
You know when he did them 2 practice sessions for Sauber in China and he binned it?
Maybe.
I don't know if he was a development driver for Ferrari then. I'm not sure.
Something to Google. But I remember Pedro De La Rosa did it, Kvyat. Leclerc's had stuff to do with Ferrari, hasn't he? Like he was part of this. Leclerc, yeah. But he had something to do with them, but he wasn't a third driver. Fisichella was a third driver, I think. I can't remember. Valentino Rossi nearly became a Ferrari driver, and then he went. Then when he was at MotoGP,
you love Valentino.
I love Valentino. He could have been an F1 driver. Can you imagine an Italian champion like him being at Ferrari? It would have been amazing. Well, I don't think he was good enough. Though.
If you do know anyone who's listening to the podcast, if you do know if these people were development drivers, it's not a massive important subject, but if you do know, please let us know in the comment section. So we have to talk about. Williams again, Jamie. Got to talk about Williams again. But however,
it's like Titanic.
There might be a ray of sunshine because George Russell has announced that they have found a fault with the car.
Wow.
So that's a great thing because hopefully they can fix it.
It does help putting a steering wheel in the car.
Putting 4 wheels on.
I mean, George, I'm not qualified, but I think I know where the wheel needs to go.
He says they found a fundamental problem with the car that could unlock some good speed, but finding a solution is not the work of a moment.
So that doesn't sound convincing at all.
They obviously don't want to discuss publicly, which is what they've done for the most of the year, because they've said that from the very beginning when they didn't come out for the first 2 days of testing. We understand, what it is, but it doesn't mean we can wake up immediately and fix the problem. It's going to take months of development work.
Basically, that's literally getting the white flag out on.
Is this saying we're working on next year's car already? We're going to be working in the simulator, and the designers are going to be working out how to fix the problem, but we're looking at a number of races before we're going to be able to fight. So
it says it all. I mean, I quite like the honesty there from George Russell, but he's clearly been told before his interviews and all that, like, just don't say this, don't say that. I can understand, because at the end of the day, you got to keep something secret, because Williams do have rivals around them where they may be knocking on the other team stores and say, we're not going anywhere. We've got the support and all that, but got to show it on the track. You could talk all you like, you got to do it on the track. That's all that matters.
Are we going to be looking at maybe Baku or Monaco for fixing? Because when you look at them tracks, a lot of people could go out in them races, so they're the sort of chances to get points.
Absolutely.
Are they hoping maybe to try and get their upgrades and find these problems before then?
I know it sounds daft, but even Monaco, if you could just somehow put in a good lap in qualifying, then you could be up there still. So you never know. I all I can say is good luck to George Russell, because it's his first season in F1, and I just hope if Williams can't provide the car for him this season, I just hope they don't think of demoting him and thinking you just can't do it. And it's just, you do see that though, when you just see some of these drivers, when you think we're never going to see their potential because the car's just not showing its potential. So how can you judge their performances by doing that? I mean, as I've always said about McLaren with Perez and Magnussen and Van Dorn to an extent, but again, Van Dorn just looks terrible now after seeing him in Formula E.
Do you not think Sirotkin was done that last year though?
Well, I think Sirotkin should have stayed another year. I think he was a very good driver. Our friend Conor Porter doesn't seem to like him because of the Perez incident in Singapore, but actually it was Perez's fault. I put my hands up. Yeah. So I again, Sirotkin should have stayed another year, but will we see him again? I don't know.
Is he the development driver?
I'm not sure.
Was he? I'm sure he was there. We're gonna go. This is another development driver side.
I feel like this is the development driver podcast today.
I'm sure he was there on the weekend. I'm sure he was there, but
it's probably with Ferrari.
They all are. It's all lined up.
Yeah.
But Williams were the only team, one of the only 2 teams who failed to score points in Australia. Can you name the other team that didn't score points in Australia a couple of weeks ago?
McLaren.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
Very good. And
which for Lando Norris, he takes it so badly, but it's like, no, Lando, it's your first race.
Lando was a terrific qualifying. If you are listening to the Pole Position podcast on your way to Bahrain, I just want to make sure that it was an amazing qualifying. You were just a bit unlucky in the race, but keep going. However, you might want to turn off now because we are going to discuss something your boss has just said. And Jamie brought this to me last night, and it's McLaren may consider their F1 future without changes to the sport.
Yeah.
Now, I might leave this to you, Jamie, because you found this last night. You sent this to me, and I want to know your thoughts really on why Zak Brown would even consider this.
I mean, obviously there's a big meeting this week, isn't there, in London apparently, where I think all the teams are there, the FIA, the
and
F1
Liberty
lot,
Media's
Liberty
hosting
Media.
it, yeah.
So, I mean, that's a hell of a meeting to be involved. I'd love to sit in with that and just see what they discuss, but no. Put it on YouTube, F1. Put the whole thing on YouTube live.
One-shot qualifying.
But, I mean, I think there is we've talked about it on the podcast before, haven't we, where there is concerns for F1 because rules do need to change.
Yep.
I was watching an interview last night that was from 2014 when Bernie Ecclestone sat with Eddie Jordan. I think it was on the BBC, and I love watching it because Eddie straight away asks Bernie, what happened to those 3 small teams that started in 2010 and now we're not here on the track? It's 4 years later. And Bernie would ask him, defy small team, what does that mean? And then I think Eddie would go on and say, well, the teams that are struggling to compete near the top and are at the bottom all the time. And Bernie kind of looked the other way, but that's the way I see it, where in F1 now, I look at the outside of it all and think, is there actually many companies and teams or manufacturers outside of F1 that want to get into F1 anymore?
No.
Don't know. Maybe Aston Martin, but they're linked with Red Bull at the moment. Would they have their own team in the future after
I think
they
were looking at it if Red Bull decided to back out as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They were like, well, we'll take the team over. But even then, that wasn't until 2022 or something. So,
that's the thing, because we got new regulations, haven't we, from 2021. So, but the way I just see it, as a fan, we've had so many teams in the last few years that have come and gone so quickly, like Jaguar in the early 2000s were there for, 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
But then we had, from 2010, we had HRT. That didn't work out. Caterham,
Lotus were in the team until they were bought out.
Lotus.
Manor.
Yeah, and it's just, it's probably just the way F1 is, but I just have this feeling that there's not much interest anymore, where if you're going to start an F1 team, you've got to go with the rules and regulations, which is fine. But then you got to realise you got to spend a lot of money to even get near anybody else.
Well, Haas had the right idea, didn't they? Because they, as much as people moan about it, they bought all their stuff off Ferrari.
Yeah.
So they didn't start from the scratch with nothing.
No.
They sort of said to Ferrari, well, can we do this? And they did a deal where they bought engines and suspension. And so, they had the right idea and they look pretty good because they are up there being the 4th fastest team at the minute. So, a team's looking at that and going, maybe if we're going to join F1, we should do it that way because it's obviously saving money. Or
maybe,
if a company like Ford or something, I'm not saying they would, but if a company like Ford came in and said, oh, we want to do this, would they want to do it all themselves? A Ford engine, how much is that going to cost?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way.
There's no way. There's no proven track record they could compete as well. But I just look at it where Zak Brown's moaning about, some changes need to be made. If they're not met, we may leave F1. But I just think, you know what, Zak? Why not actually get the team up and going? Because I've been waiting 6 years and nothing has happened. You last won a race in Brazil 2012 with Jenson Button. Yeah. A lot of races have taken place since then, and we are in our second race coming up in 2019. What is going on?
He's retired and done a book tour, and we've met him since McLaren last one.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it's changed.
That's
how much it's changed. And I read it and thought, I agree. There needs to be some changes in F1 where Liberty Media, they're in it now. They're in F1 now. They must know how it all works since they've taken over from Bernie.
And they're doing a reasonable job as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know the business side of things. I'm not a businessman, so I don't know how you make money out of it, etc. But as long as the fans, I'm a fan, so as long as the fans enjoy their experiences in F1, and as long as we get racing, not every race, not every race is ever going to be exciting. It's like football; you can't write what's going to happen. But as long as F1 can stay as competitive as it should always be and gets exciting for the fans and all that, then people come and watch again. But one problem I have is Liberty Media not letting letting F1 not be a thing on terrestrial TV anymore, where okay, we have highlights, but only one race is live throughout the year, which is just not good for audience views. If you want future fans, you've got to have that as a free thing, unless, of course, your family have Sky, but it's just the way it is. But going back to Zak Brown, he goes on about the rule changes, and everyone's got things that they want to change in F1. I think Ferrari have been doing it for years. They've been known for years to moan that they're going to quit F1, and then we never hear anything a week later. So I think McLaren are just playing mind games ahead of a meeting. I think Zak Brown is... What do you think of him? You're a McLaren fan. What's going on? It's just not happening, is it?
I don't know. I mean, I every time you see an interview of Zak Brown, you sort of buy what he's selling, if it makes sense.
He's good at that,
You know, when you listen to him, you sort of are tuned into what he's saying, but then when you watch the race and you watch where they are, you think, you sort of snap out of his nonsense and you think, well, hang on, we're not. Because we're down at the bottom. Carlos Sainz only did about 18 laps before his engine blew up.
Yeah.
And, Lando Norris did a great qualifying, but is struggling behind the rest of the pack. I mean, I think he did a good overtake past, was it Giovinazzi?
I think it was, yeah.
Can't remember, but, he did well against that. But apart from that, McLaren were a no-show. And you look at the sponsors and you think, we're hardly on the telly. And the only reason we are on the telly is because the engine's caught fire next to our name on the board. So... I don't know. I think, like you said, 6 years of pain being a McLaren fan.
They haven't had a title sponsor, right, either, have they?
No, since Vodafone. Is it since
Vodafone? And I think Coca-Cola was supposed to, but...
Oh, they are joining the brand, but as you see, there's only a little symbol at the end of Coca-Cola.
I just think, overall, make your threats. Because they need F1, McLaren, in terms of employment. So I don't understand what Zak Brown's going on about. I question him, actually. I question, if they don't perform this season, then shouldn't you go? Because he's been there for, 2-3 years? I've not seen any progress, really. He keeps... When you watch his documentary in Drive to Survive, and then you hear his team radios, he's always praising Alonso. And there's nothing wrong with it. I would. I mean, I would do anything for him. I'd clean his toilet for him. But, it's Fernando Alonso. He's gone. But it's the fact that he keeps relying on Fernando to, he's going to get us out of the situation. It's like, no, he's trying, but he hasn't got... It's you lot that need to do their part as well.
Do you know what it reminds me of? If they were in a massive big team meeting discussing what they were going to be doing for the next season, so what engine we should drive, what car are we going to use, what drivers are we going to use. They're in this massive team meeting. Nobody's allowed their phones. And then Zak Brown's phone starts ringing, and it's Alonso. And he reminds me of the type of person that would pick it up.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, it's Alonso. Yeah. And they're having this massive team meeting discussing the future, and they're like, hang on, it's Alonso. He just seems like the type of guy that would just drop everything to sort of get Fernando on side. And like you said, that's not an issue. But when you look at where McLaren are, and Fernando Alonso last season realised that he didn't want to be a part of it anymore.
No, yeah, he had enough.
You need to look forward in that sense.
But I think as well, Alonso said F1 these days is predictable, it's boring, and that's what kind of drove him out of F1. And he's right in a way, because it's not as exciting as it used to be. Some of the drivers even say it's not as tiring as it used to be. I remember when I'd watch races in the early 2000s, and they were knackered. They were drinking fruit juice in their press conferences, but they look sweat. You don't really see that anymore. I don't know if that really matters.
I didn't even really see that in Singapore last year. I mean, I know they say that it's the worst race of the year, but to an extent, you didn't really see they looked completely dehydrated.
No.
They'd fall to the floor. Whether that is changing. But when you look at the revenue for what teams get what, under the last deal, which I'm guessing was Bernie Ecclestone signed it, Ferrari had an estimated 68 million bonus for taking part. Red Bull and Mercedes was additional payments of 35 million, and all three teams and McLaren also received 30 million plus for the Constructors' Championship bonus. How do we see that? I mean, obviously, Ferrari are going to get that because every time Ferrari moan, I expect they get more money. Is that what Zak Brown's trying to do with McLaren? If he moans, he might get more money from them.
But as I said to you, I think it's mind games. I don't think they're leaving. there's always.
What are they going to do?
You've got to have you're going to have
MotoGP?
disagreements. Yeah, exactly. You're always going to have disagreements in F1 when it comes to management and trying to, obviously get some rules and regulations sorted. But I just don't care about McLaren at the moment. Where it's just like, I want to see it perform. Like, you've had 6 years. Where's the excuses though? Like, they've got a massive technology center, and you got to think, well, what are they doing?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, they ruined Honda, but that was probably because of Alonso, to be honest.
Yeah.
And this Renault relationship doesn't really matter to Renault. I don't think. I think it's for them. It's just more money.
Yeah, I think the relationship's just in general. If you asked a fan, he'd just be like, nah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, it doesn't really matter. But we'll see if obviously they might let us know what's happened in the meeting. Some journalists might find out some gossip before the weekend, and we'll see if anything's changed regarding that.
It's like Brexit. They've got until like a certain date to sort out the rules. So they've got until June, haven't they?
Yeah, something like that to figure out what's going to be happening in the next couple of months. But let's hope they actually decide something that's worth talking about. But something that is actually worth talking about before we wrap up this last episode, this episode of the Pole Position podcast, is on the 21st of March this year, which is only a couple of days ago. Construction began on the Vietnam Grand Prix circuit.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
It's the Hanoi Motorsports Circuit. It's called.
Isn't it like half street, half actual racetrack?
Yeah.
I've read.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Don't know. It'll be the country's first ever F1 race, and it'll be in 2020. It'll set to become the fourth proper street circuit on the F1 calendar next year, alongside Monaco, Singapore, and Azerbaijan. Featured 22 corners, and some of them will be borrowing heavily from tracks like the Suzuka and the Nürburgring.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm actually looking forward to it. I think 2020 will be an important year for F1 again. If what's going on with these meetings, might decide something to do with that. But I think having a new Grand Prix is always exciting. I think when Mexico came in a couple of years ago, it was exciting to finally be somewhere different. But
I think we just need to know now when it'll be proposed, like what dates they'd get. Because we don't know
on the calendar.
Yeah, because we don't know how many races we're going to get next year with Britain under threat, Germany, Mexico, Spa, a lot, Monza.
So really, it might only be about 4 races. Remember back in the day in old school F1,
16,
like 6, yeah.
Yeah, those are the days. But no, they can't. Surely a track has to move for Vietnam because 22 races just sounds a bit too much. I think 21's too much. But
well, here's the question then: which one would you get rid of?
Oh, that's a good one.
I know you'd say Abu Dhabi, but that's not possible due to money.
China.
Right.
I'm not fussed about China.
No, and I get that.
Don't know. I think it's a good track actually, but I just don't.
There's no hype for it.
No hype for it. You got to think as well, marketing, haven't you? China's a massive country. You want to have a race in China, America, and Russia because they are just big countries, and you want to get the fan bases there. And the Chinese do come in big numbers. There's a lot of fans out there. They loved Jenson Button. I remember back then. So did Japan. But yeah, I don't know. China maybe. But in terms of actual, if I was the marketer, I would not want to lose China at all. But if it was down to just as a racing fan, I'd get rid of China.
Okay. Well, do you know what I might do? I might leave that for you to sit on for a week.
What would you swap? What would you swap?
I sort of agree with you on China, but I was also thinking Austria. But then I was like, well, I can't really do that because it's called the Red Bull Ring for a reason.
I would like to go to an Austria race. Don't know.
Well, you should go to this one really because if I'm discussing it, I'm cancelling it for a couple of years' time. So this might be the last race. But no, I think we should both think on that actually, and just think, which race would we get rid of? Because I agree. I think Sergio Perez moaned a couple of years ago that the calendar is excessive. It's too much for everyone to move equipment and for all the cars to be moved over to every single race. Almost every other 2 weeks. It's too much. So yeah, it'd be interesting if any tracks do actually lose it. I mean, we know of course that Silverstone's contract runs out at the end of this year, but will they lose the British Grand Prix for the Vietnam Grand Prix?
It's the fact they keep advertising that could be their last one. So.
Yeah, still, yeah. So that is still in doubt. But before we end this, I just want to ask you the whole Bahrain. Before we go, who do you think will win?
I'm going to say Bottas again. I'd love to
man.
see. I think Bottas needs to win again as well, because I think he needs to make that statement of thinking, because he's never won consecutively, and I think that's really important for Bottas to just make that mark in front of Hamilton and Vettel. At least.
Do you think it should be, if it was a bit closer as well, it would be even better?
I don't. As long as he wins, I don't think people care that much, really. If he does it by another like 20 plus seconds or 10 seconds or whatever, then people can think, he can clearly control a race, and that's what's really vital with some of these drivers. Vettel can do that. Hamilton, well, I say Vettel can do that, and then Germany happened last year. You know what? I've come to conclusion though. I was thinking this the other day.
Please do tell.
Vettel's not a real racer. Hamilton is, Vettel isn't. And I think that's the difference between the two.
Please explain.
Well, for example, I don't recall Vettel ever doing big overtakes. Whenever he was at Red Bull, he was always from the front. Mm-hmm. And the only like Abu Dhabi 2012, he started last because his car was left out on the circuit in qualifying because he ran out of gas or something. Like the car just stopped. And due to the rules, he had to start from the back or start from the the pit lane. And, okay, he came all the way up to third in that race, and he overtook Jenson Button over that double corner, which was an amazing overtake.
Was he using DRS for most of it? Or
I think so, yeah. But even so, like, when you have that car, you should...
Kers,
yeah. But you don't ever recall Vettel overtaking Alonso, Vettel overtaking Hamilton, back in those days. And I think that's my problem with Vettel at the moment. When do you see Vettel overtake Hamilton at the moment? Never. I don't think he's not properly. Not when they've both been at Ferrari and Mercedes. I don't recall it.
No.
See what I mean? Like, Hamilton does dare himself. And, like, I remember in Abu Dhabi last year, Vettel was second and Hamilton was first. And Vettel said after the race he was trying to chase him down, but it's like, he said he couldn't get near him. And I'm thinking, maybe you're just not as good as people think you are. I like Vettel. Got nothing wrong with him, but I don't think he's as... I think people forget he's a 4-time world champion. Because of what we've seen over the last few years. It's been 6 years now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, if anyone disagrees with Jamie's points, please let him. Please let him know.
Which is why if Vettel doesn't compete this year, then Bottas replacing him would be great.
Really?
Yeah. As in, like, Bottas being the contender instead of Vettel. We'll see. But if Bottas wins again, then that would be fantastic.
I'd love a Bottas, Vettel, Leclerc and Hamilton all cross the line within 15 seconds of each other.
Watch some MotoGP, you'll get that.
Yeah,
you'll get
I know I'm pushing it a little bit.
You'll get a Marquez, Dovizioso and Rossi maybe, and a bit of Jorge Lorenzo.
Or Formula E with the Mexico Grand Prix
a few weeks ago.
Where,
speaking of former F1 drivers, John O'Verne won on Saturday.
Did he?
Yeah, what first race win in the season for him.
What a guy! But Jamie thinks Valtteri Bottas is going to win in Bahrain. What do you think? Let us know in the comment section below. Thank you very much, Jamie Davies, for being a part of this. This has been Jack Price here as well. This has been the Pole Position Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you very much for listening.